I used to think that family meant unconditional love. That no matter what mistakes you made, no matter how many times you fell, there would always be someone waiting to catch you. Maybe that's why it hurt so much more when it was my own family who let me fall, and just watched. My name is Susan Blanchard. I was 32 years old when it all fell apart. Back then, it was the late 1970s, and life moved slower out here in rural Illinois. Our family farm, passed down through generations, was supposed to be the heart of our lives. But hearts can break, and farms can fail. I left years before it started to crumble. Moved to Chicago, became a lawyer, built a life where I didn't smell cow manure every morning and feel the crushing weight of expectation on my shoulders. My parents saw it differently, though. To them, I was the rebellious daughter who abandoned her roots, who thought she was too good for the life that made her. Meanwhile, my older brother Jake stayed behind. The golden boy, he ran the farm, soaked up their praise, and became the perfect son they always wanted. It didn't matter how many late nights I worked, how many cases I won, or how many times I called to check in. I was the outsider. Jake was the heir. And still, when Jake called me that summer, his voice low and full of something he didn't want to name, I didn't hesitate. I started sending money to the farm's account. Quietly, regularly. Jake convinced me not to tell them. It would hurt their pride. He said, "Let's just keep it between us." I believed him. God help me. I believed him. Christmas Eve came faster than I expected. I hadn't been home in almost 2 years. But I thought maybe this time would be different. Maybe, with the farm stable again, thanks to my help, we could have a real Christmas. Laughter, warmth. Maybe they'd even say thank you. The house smelled of pine and wood smoke. The Christmas tree standing tall and proud in the living room. My mom had gone all out, handmade ornaments, twinkling lights, the works. The fire crackled. The table was set with her good china. It was picture perfect. Until it wasn't. Dinner started out tense but manageable. The usual small talk. How was work? How's the city? Jake bragging about the farm like he'd built it with his own 2 hands. I bit my tongue, sipping at my wine, letting the conversation wash over me. Then Mom brought it up. If it weren't for Jake, she said, beaming with pride, we'd have lost the farm months ago. I froze, the fork halfway to my mouth. Your brother has sacrificed so much, Dad added, his voice thick with emotion. We're so proud of him. We don't know what we'd do without him. Jake didn't say anything, just leaned back in his chair, a smug smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. My heart hammered in my chest. Surely he would say something. Surely he would correct them. But he didn't. He sat there, soaking it up. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. That's wonderful, I managed to say, even though my throat burned. I told myself to let it go. It was Christmas. It wasn't worth starting a fight. But as the evening wore on, the bitterness grew. Every laugh, every clink of glasses, every praise directed at Jake felt like a slap. I kept thinking about the nights I stayed up late drafting contracts just to afford the extra money to send. The sacrifices I made without asking for anything in return. And he was taking the credit. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. As we sat around the tree opening presents, my mom handed Jake an envelope. Inside was a card thanking him for everything. For saving the farm. For saving them. Jake chuckled, modestly waving it off. Just doing what needed to be done. He said. I snapped. I'm the one who's been sending money. I said, my voice trembling but loud enough to silence the room. Every month, since July. It wasn't Jake. The room went still. For a second, I thought maybe they'd believe me. Maybe they'd ask questions. Instead, Dad let out a sharp bark of laughter. Oh, Susan, he said, shaking his head, still desperate to be the center of attention. Huh? I blinked, stunned. That's not fair, I said, my voice cracking. I'm telling the truth. Mom's face hardened. Enough, Susan, not tonight. Don't ruin Christmas. I turned to Jake, pleading with my eyes. Say something. Tell them. You know it's true. But he just shrugged. I have no idea what she's talking about, he said casually, popping another candy into his mouth. I felt the room tilt. This couldn't be happening. But it was. My parents looked at me like I was some pathetic liar, desperate for scraps of praise. Like I hadn't spent the last 6 months quietly trying to keep their legacy alive. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You can believe whatever you want," I said, voice shaking, "but the bank records don't lie. I'll get the receipts. And when I do, you'll see exactly who's been keeping this place afloat." Dad scoffed again. "Go ahead," he said. "Embarrass yourself. Wouldn't be the first time." Jake just smirked, leaning back, arms folded across his chest like a king on a throne. I stormed upstairs to my childhood bedroom, heart pounding, vision blurry with tears I refused to shed. Downstairs, the laughter resumed, forced, hollow, like they couldn't wait to erase me from the night, from the memory, from everything. I sat on the edge of my bed, gripping the edge of the blanket, and whispered to myself, "I will prove it. I will not let them bury me again." And somewhere deep inside, something shifted. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about the truth. And I wasn't going to let it stay buried. Not this time. I barely slept that night. I kept thinking, over and over, about the way my dad's voice had dripped with disappointment. About the way my mom crossed her arms, shutting me out like I was some petty child throwing a tantrum. About Jake's smug little smile, like he already knew how it would all play out. The thing is, he did know. That's what stung the most. He knew they'd believe him over me. They always had. But not this time. At dawn, I packed my suitcase with shaking hands. My mind made up. I didn't bother leaving a note. I didn't say goodbye. I grabbed my keys, slammed the front door so hard the wreath fell off its hook, and drove away without looking back. The fields were still dark, the snow untouched and glittering under the early morning stars. My breath fogged up the inside of the windshield. But I didn't care. I just drove, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, pushing down the lump rising in my throat until it finally crumbled into something colder. Harder. Rage. It wasn't just about proving I had sent the money anymore. It was about proving that no matter how much they tried to erase me, no matter how tightly Jake clung to his crown, the truth would still find its way out. Halfway back to Chicago, my phone buzzed. I almost didn't look, thinking it was just some holiday greeting from a coworker. But something told me, check it. It was Jake. I pulled into a rest stop and opened the message. "You really want to play this game, Susan? You think showing a few receipts changes anything? Go ahead, burn it all down. See who they believe in the end. Spoiler, it's not you." I stared at the screen, the cold seeping deeper into my bones than the winter air ever could. He knew. He knew he'd lied, and he didn't even care. Worse, he wasn't afraid. Because somewhere deep down, Jake understood something that I was only now starting to realize. Sometimes, it's not about truth, it's about control. And he still thought he had it. I closed the message, my hands trembling with fury. "You think you've won?" I thought. "You think you can scare me into silence?" Not this time. I threw the car back into drive and tore out of the rest stop, gravel spitting out from under the tires. By the time I hit the city limits, the sun was just starting to rise, a pale, tired light that barely warmed the skyline. Chicago looked gray and skeletal under the winter sky, like a city still half asleep. It suited my mood just fine. I went straight to the bank. They weren't open yet, but I sat in the parking lot, engine idling, heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. Every minute felt like an hour. I kept replaying Jake's smirk, his text, my father's voice dismissing me like I was some silly little girl craving attention. I wasn't craving attention. I was demanding respect. When the clock finally clicked to 8, I was the first one through the door. The teller behind the counter gave me a polite, rehearsed smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" I swallowed down the knot in my throat. "I need copies," I said, my voice sharper than I intended, "of every deposit made to the Blanchard Farm account from July until now." The teller blinked, a little startled, but nodded. "Of course. Just give me a moment." As he disappeared into the back, I stood there, clutching the strap of my purse so tightly it dug into my shoulder. I could feel the other customers milling around behind me, hear the shuffle of papers, the hum of machines, but it all sounded distant, like I was underwater. Finally, he returned with a thick folder. "Here you go," he said, setting it gently on the counter. "These are all the transactions under your name. I flipped through the stack. There it was. Every deposit. Every date. Every amount. My name attached to every single one. Proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I wasn't a liar. Proof that no matter what Jake said, the truth had a heartbeat, and it was pounding in my hands. I signed the necessary forms, thanked the teller, and walked out of the bank into the freezing Chicago morning with the folder clutched against my chest like a shield. I could have gone home. I could have waited for Christmas to pass, for tempers to cool, but I wasn't going to. They wanted to act like Jake was some kind of savior? Fine. They could watch their savior fall apart in real time. I got into my car and started the drive back to the farm. The roads were busier now, packed with holiday travelers, families bundled into cars, kids fighting in the back seats, couples singing off-key to the radio. It should have felt warm, familiar, but to me, it felt like I was driving straight into battle. The entire way, Jake's text kept replaying in my mind. See who they believe. I wasn't naive, even with the receipts, even with the proof burning a hole in the passenger seat next to me. I knew there was a good chance they'd still choose him. They'd twist it, pretend it didn't matter, find a way to make me the villain again. But for the first time, I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for their approval. I was doing it for me. Because sometimes the truth isn't about winning. It's about refusing to be erased. As the farmhouse came into view, its familiar outline softened by a layer of fresh snow, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. This wasn't going to be pretty, but it was going to be real. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the winter sun was already dipping low, casting the fields in that sharp, golden light that always made everything look deceptively peaceful. The farmhouse looked the same as when I'd left it, the crooked wreath still dangling off the front door. A faint curl of smoke rising from the chimney. You wouldn't think that behind those worn white walls was a family hanging by a thread. I parked and sat there for a second, clutching the folder of receipts in my lap. My heart was hammering so loud it felt like the whole car was vibrating with it. But I wasn't scared. Not anymore. I climbed out and walked up to the porch, my boots crunching over the frozen ground. Every step felt heavier than the last, like gravity itself was trying to pull me back. I wasn't going back. I knocked once, sharply. It took a minute, but eventually my mom opened the door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked surprised to see me. Not happy, not angry, just wary, like she already knew this wasn't going to be good. What are you doing here, Susan? She asked, glancing over her shoulder. I held up the folder. I need you and Dad to sit down. Now. She frowned but didn't argue. She stepped aside, and I walked in, the warm air from the fire brushing against my cold cheeks. Jake was sprawled on the couch, as usual, thumbing through a magazine like he didn't have a care in the world. My dad sat in his recliner, sipping coffee, his newspaper folded on the armrest. Jake didn't even look up when I entered. The casualness of it almost made me laugh. Like none of them believed I could possibly matter enough to shake their little world. But they were about to find out. I dropped the folder onto the coffee table with a thud. What's this now? My dad muttered, raising an eyebrow. Proof, I said, my voice steady. Proof that I've been the one sending the money. Every month, since July. Jake stiffened. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but I caught it. My dad leaned forward, flipping through the papers, his frown deepening. My mom hovered behind him, peering over his shoulder. Silence stretched between us, long and taut. Then my dad set the papers down like they were garbage and leaned back in his chair. Well, he said with a snort. That doesn't mean anything. My jaw dropped. What? I said, my voice sharp. It doesn't mean anything, he repeated, shrugging. Maybe you deposited some money. Doesn't change the fact that Jake's been here, working, doing the hard part. I stared at him, disbelief crashing over me like a wave. It doesn't change the fact that I paid your bills. I shouted, my voice cracking. I kept this farm afloat when you couldn't. When Jake couldn't. My mom crossed her arms, her mouth tight. We didn't ask for your help, Susan. The words hit harder than a slap. I stumbled back a step, feeling like the air had been punched out of my lungs. You didn't ask because you were too proud to admit you needed it, I said, my voice trembling. And Jake, I spun to face him. Jake let you believe he was saving the farm while he sat back and watched me bleed for it. Jake finally looked up, his face infuriatingly calm. You think a few bucks makes you a hero? He said lazily. You left, Susan. You abandoned us. You don't get to waltz back in here and act like you're some kind of savior. I was shaking now. From rage, from heartbreak, from the sheer absurdity of it all. I didn't abandon anyone, I hissed. I built my own life because I had to. Because staying here would have killed me. My dad set his coffee cup down hard enough to make it rattle. That's enough, he barked. We're not doing this. Not on Christmas. I laughed then, a short, bitter sound that echoed in the quiet room. Oh, now you care about Christmas. I said, now you care about family. Where was all that loyalty when Jake was stealing my sacrifices and wearing them like medals? My mom's face hardened. We're grateful for everything Jake has done, she said coldly, and if you can't be happy for your brother's hard work, maybe you shouldn't come back at all. There it was, the line drawn in the sand. Jake leaned back on the couch, a smug grin curling at the edges of his mouth. He'd won, not because he was right, but because they needed him to be. They needed their golden boy, their perfect son who stayed behind and played the role they wanted. Not the daughter who left. Not the daughter who dared to want more. For a long moment, I just stood there, feeling the final piece of whatever was left between us splinter and fall away. I could have stayed. I could have kept arguing, kept trying to force them to see me. But what's the point of screaming into a storm that's already decided you're the enemy? I picked up the folder, tucked it under my arm, and turned toward the door. Where are you going? My dad barked. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Home, I said, and for the first time, I meant it. Not this house, not this family. Home, where I belonged, where I was enough. Without another word, I stepped out into the cold and slammed the door behind me. The sound echoing into the darkening evening. Behind me, the farmhouse stood small and brittle against the endless, empty fields. Ahead of me, the open road, and I wasn't looking back. The drive back to Chicago felt different this time. Not heavy, not filled with doubt. It felt clean, final. The cold air rushed against the windows as I sped down the back roads. My hands steady on the wheel. No second guessing, no guilt gnawing at my ribs. They made their choice, and I was finally making mine. The first thing I did when I got home, before even taking off my coat, was call the bank. I sat at my kitchen table, staring out at the city skyline dusted with snow, and waited for the teller to pull up the farm account. Yes, ma'am, she said politely. How can I help you? I want to cancel all future transfers, I said, my voice calm, steady, effective immediately. A few keystrokes later, it was done. Just like that. The invisible thread tying me to that farm, to that version of myself who was always desperate for their approval, snapped clean in half. I hung up the phone. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The first few weeks were quiet. Too quiet. I figured it would take time before they noticed. After all, pride can make people blind to reality longer than you think. I kept waiting for a call. An angry voicemail. A guilt trip. But there was nothing. And honestly, it stung less than I thought it would. Work at the law firm picked up after the holidays, and I threw myself into it with a kind of ferocity that surprised even me. Late nights, early mornings, chasing promotions and clients like my life depended on it. Maybe, in a way, it did, because every time I felt that old ache, that need to be needed, to be accepted, I buried it under case files and contracts and coffee-fueled deadlines. I was building something real, something mine, and they had no part in it. It was around mid-February when the cracks started to show. It came in little whispers first. A neighbor from back home left me a message on Facebook. Hey, just heard about the trouble at the farm. Hope you're doing okay. Trouble? I didn't answer, just closed the app and moved on. But the next week, another message came, this time from an old high school classmate. Is it true the Blanchard farm is up for auction? Crazy to think about. Hope your family's holding up. Auction. The word hit like a cold slap. I sat there in my tiny apartment, staring at the screen, my heart hammering. Jake was losing the farm. The farm I had saved over and over again without thanks. The farm they had defended him for. Mocked me over. Called me a liar about. Now it was crumbling right under him. And it wasn't just gossip. A few days later, official notices started popping up online, legal records, property filings, Blanchard Farm, foreclosure proceedings pending. It was real. It was happening. And there wasn't a damn thing I needed, or wanted, to do about it. By March, the news was impossible to avoid. Neighbors, old family friends, even distant cousins started reaching out. Most messages followed the same sad script. I can't believe Jake let it get this bad. Your parents must be devastated. You always tried to help, we see that now. It was funny, in a twisted way. All those years I spent screaming into the void, begging them to see me, to see the truth, and now, when everything was in ashes, suddenly everyone wanted to offer sympathy. Too little, too late. The guilt tried to creep in sometimes. Tried to whisper that maybe I should go back, fix it, save them one more time. But I shut it down hard. They made their choice. Jake made his. And I was finally learning to live with mine. The twist came one rainy Saturday in late March. I was curled up on my couch, half watching a movie, when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick it up. It was my mom, the first time she'd called since Christmas. Her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying. "Susan," she said, "please, we need to talk." I stayed silent, my stomach tight. "The bank," she continued, her voice cracking. "They're taking the farm. We didn't know how bad it was. Jake kept saying everything was fine. But now," she broke off, sniffling. I waited for the ask, for the inevitable plea. Sure enough, it came. "Is there anything you can do?" she whispered. "You're a lawyer, right? Maybe you could help?" I closed my eyes, letting the weight of her words settle. They didn't call to apologize. They didn't call to say they were sorry for not believing me. They called because they were drowning. And once again, they wanted me to be the life raft. I opened my mouth, ready to unleash all the rage I'd bottled up for months. But instead, I breathed, deep and steady, and I said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you." A stunned silence stretched across the line. But your family," she stammered. I smiled sadly. "No," I said, "not anymore." And then I hung up. Not in anger, not in revenge, in peace. Because walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's the bravest thing you can do. That night, I stood by my window, watching the rain smear the city lights into watercolor blurs. And for the first time since I could remember, I didn't feel like a disappointment. I didn't feel like a failure. I felt whole, not because I finally won, but because I stopped needing to. Spring came late that year. The snow melted reluctantly, leaving behind patches of gray slush and bare trees that looked like they were clinging to winter's ghost. Everything felt a little unfinished. Kind of like us. News of the farm's auction spread fast. In a town like ours, you couldn't sneeze without someone talking about it. I heard bits and pieces through the grapevine. How my parents had to move into a small rental house on the edge of town. How Jake bounced from odd jobs to unemployment checks. His name now whispered with pity instead of pride. How the Blanchard name, once synonymous with tradition and hard work, had turned into a sad little cautionary tale. There was a time when that would have broken me. Now, it barely stirred the surface. I thought that was the end of it. That the story had finally closed itself without any dramatic finale. But life rarely lets you walk away that easily. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was browsing a bookstore downtown, running my fingers across rows of worn spines, when I felt someone step into my space. I turned, and there he was. Jake. He looked older somehow, like the past few months had aged him years. His clothes hung loose on his frame, and his eyes, once so cocky and sure, were dull. Hollow. "Susan," he said, his voice low, almost unsure. I straightened, my heart steady in my chest. "Jake." He shifted awkwardly, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Can we talk?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to walk away, to let silence be my final answer. But some part of me, the stubborn part that refused to carry anger like a stone, nodded. We found a bench outside, the spring sun doing little to cut through the lingering chill. Jake stared at the ground for a long time before speaking. "I screwed up," he said finally. His voice was raw. I lied. I let you take the fall. I let Mom and Dad believe you were some selfish, attention seeker. And I just stood there, watching. I stayed silent, letting him sit with it. I thought if they kept believing in me, maybe I'd start believing in myself too. He said, his voice cracking, but it didn't work. It never works that way. I looked at him, really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see the brother who stole my credit or basked in their approval. I saw a man who had lost everything, including himself. Why now? I asked softly. He shrugged, a humorless chuckle slipping out. Because there's nothing left to hide behind anymore. He said, the farm's gone. Their respect, gone. Hell, I'm barely hanging on. A gust of wind swept through, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and thawing streets. He looked up at me then, eyes rimmed with red. I'm sorry, Susan, he said, not because things got bad, not because I got caught, but because you deserved better. Always did, and I was too damn proud to see it. A part of me, the wounded part, wanted to lash out. To throw every hurt, every betrayal, back in his face. But instead, I just sat there, breathing, because revenge wasn't what I wanted. Closure was. I know, I said finally. Jake blinked, like he hadn't expected that. I forgave you a long time ago. I added, not for you, for me. He swallowed hard, nodding, the relief almost too much for him to bear. I don't expect us to be close again, he said, voice thick. I just needed you to know. I stood, brushing off my coat. I know, I repeated. He didn't follow me when I walked away. He just sat there, head bowed against the sun. And somehow, that hurt more than any of the fights we'd ever had. A few weeks later, I got a letter, handwritten, from my parents. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places like someone had been crying. It wasn't a long letter. Just a few paragraphs. They apologized. Not with excuses, not with justifications, just a simple, honest acknowledgement that they had failed me, that they saw it now, that they regretted it more than I would ever know. I read it once, then folded it carefully and tucked it into the bottom drawer of my desk, not out of spite, but because forgiveness doesn't always mean reopening old doors. Sometimes it just means knowing you could open them, and choosing not to. Now, I'm good. Not the Instagram perfect kind of good. The real kind. Messy, honest, earned. I still drive past fields sometimes. Those long stretches of open sky and soil. And a pang hits me in the chest. Not of sadness, of gratitude. Because leaving wasn't easy, but staying would have been harder. And I'm proud of the woman who made the harder choice. The woman who stopped begging to be seen. The woman who built her own life. From the ground up. With no one's permission but her own. Some ghosts never really leave. I know that. There will always be echoes. Of Christmases where my laughter felt too loud. Of nights staring at the ceiling, wondering why love had to be so conditional. But now, when those ghosts whisper, I whisper back, I survived you, and I'm not looking back.